Hey you! Yeah, so chances are, if you played a decent amount of Terraria, you've heard of Biome keys. They're some of the rarest items with a drop rate of 1 in 2500. Yeah, big number. With these keys, you can open up a corresponding chest in the post-Plantera dungeon, and with each chest, a fancy schmancy new weapon themed around the biome that the key was from. In total, there are 6 of these weapons, one for the jungle, tundra, corruption, crimson, desert, and hallow. As I mentioned earlier, you get these right after Plantera, which happens to be the point of the game where you unlock like a zillion new weapons. So, how do the rare and special biome weapons stack up against all the other alternatives? Here's the deal. We're going to start with a short analysis comparison thingy for each weapon in relation to all the other stuff. This is going to be based on a few factors, being damage, gimmicks, and actual viability for bosses and enemies. From this info, I'm going to rate them from 1 through 10, going off of how good they are for the post-Plantera phase of Terraria. Without further ado, let's begin with the jungle weapon, the Piranha Gun. This bad boy shoots out a bunch of little hungry goblins that latch onto whatever you shoot them at for constant DPS without the need of precision other than the initial shot. So in the gimmick department, this thing is super unique. But when you look at the actual damage, it's fairly decent for groups because it does hit multiple at once and the piranhas auto-swap targets. But after a quick test on Duke Fishron, the DPS output on this thing just isn't really that great. I mean, it's kind of getting mogged by a chain gun with glorified bullets, which is arguably easier to get at the same point of progression. So with that, the Piranha Gun gets an okay 5 out of 10. It's fine and kinda cool. Next up, coming in from the Tundra biome, we have the Frost Hydra Staff. In terms of uniqueness, since there have been so many more sentries added, the Hydra doesn't really stand out as much anymore. Even though the Frost Hydra does have less uniqueness though, there's one great thing to note about sentries, and that is of course passive damage for any class. And before Golem, it's an easy contender for the best sentry. Only other thing to mention is how the lower fire rate does tend to miss fast enemies, but hey, damage is damage. I think I'm going to give the Frost Hydra Staff a solid 7 out of 10 for versatility. Next up, we have the subscribe button. Listen. Sabir, the other B-Cube, just hit 3K, but I'm still going to try my best to pass him by the end of 2024, and for that, I need your help. So if you don't mind, the button's right down there. Thank you! Okay, now we're going to start getting evil with the Corruption biome. Ooh, scary. The Corruption has actually one of my favorite weapons in Terraria, the Scourge of the Corruptor. This bad boy is a big old javelin that spews out little purple munchers, which is totally what they're officially called. These little guys break into even smaller little guys, which are also called little purple munchers, if anyone was wondering. So yeah, staying on theme, this one is also very unique. I think you can see why I decided to add that as part of my judging now. Then on to damage, the most popular and one of the best melee weapons at this point is of course the Terra Blade, so that's what we're going to compare it with. With crowds, they're actually fairly similarly effective, with the Terra Blade having a slight advantage for lots of enemies, and the Scourge doing its best on a smaller group of up to maybe 5 or 6. On Dookie Boy, the Terra Blade did a little bit more damage, but that was partially due to having a much easier time hitting shots. Yeah. Scourge of the Corruptor gets a solid 8 out of 10. Then things start to get a little more interesting with the Crimson biome, because we have our second melee weapon, the Vampire Knives. Most of the biome weapons have received pretty fat balance changes over the years, but this one seems to have the most prominent and controversial. So let's see what I can find out of here. The Vampire Knives throw out a number of knives that do both a decent amount of damage and give some pretty nice lifesteal. Damage-wise, it's slightly worse for Duke than the Terra Blade and the Scourge, and crowd control doesn't really give anything insane either, but the lifesteal on this thing is literally so useful. Like, yeah, you could just not take damage, but let's be honest, we're all taking damage. The lifesteal is enough to deem the Vampire Knives very useful. And for those reasons, I'm going to give the Vampire Knives like an 8.2 out of 10, because it's slightly better than the Scourge for the healing. Moving quickly into the desert, we got the Desert Tiger Staff. But what's cool is that the tiger actually upgrades after each summon rather than just getting more tigers. This mechanic isn't insanely unique because Abigail and the Stardust Dragon do it too, but hey, it's still pretty cool. This weapon for functional use is pretty good, but this is also the point of Terraria where you can get yourself the Terra Prisma, which literally wipes the floor with any summon weapon, so like, yeah. There's also probably better alternatives like the Raven or Xeno Staff too. Not much to say here, this weapon gets a 7 out of 10. Last up, for the 6th and final weapon, straight out of the Hallow, the Rainbow Gun. I'll give you $1 billion if you can guess what this one does. Okay, fine, I'll tell you. It shoots rainbows, duh. What am I doing? This one has probably the least depth to it. It shoots out a stationary rainbow that lasts for 40 seconds. It's similar to something like a Nimbus Rod or a Clinger Staff, but with a very interesting shape. For damage, it's really just fine. It's a decent source of passive damage, maybe at the start of a boss fight, but only for 40 seconds. I also feel like the damage you can put out with a different weapon during the time it takes to set up another shot of this thing ends up just being more worth it. With all that, unfortunately, the Rainbow Gun gets a 4 out of 10. Overall, the biome weapons are definitely a really cool bunch of weapons, but maybe just not the best bunch of weapons. Although some are pretty good. Alright, that's just about it for this one. Thanks to all my members. Last time I had 1, now I have 13. Shout out Tubbsy. Bye bye.